Hey everybody, it's your daily report with Angry Tim. Wanted to talk a little bit more about owning versus renting, and even if you buy a house in this crazy market right now, um, is it worth it? Um, just a couple of thoughts on renting versus owning, just from my own experience. Um, the nice thing about renting, again, you don't need a whole lot of money. Usually just maybe the down payment, first month's rent, last month's rent. Um, and you can get into, probably something nice. Usually they're fixed up, renovated again. They may have new appliances, new painted walls, carpets will be cleaned or new possibly. So you don't have to do any work or remodeling. It's turnkey ready. You just move in, bring in your furniture, and you're ready to go. And the same thing when you leave, you just pack your stuff and go. And if you leave it in good condition, you'll get your deposit back. So it's fairly easy to get in and out of an apartment or a rental. And typically the leases are yearly. So you're not really stuck there for long if you don't like the neighborhood, or if you're planning on moving, you can kind of plan it like, okay, my lease is up in November, and you can already plan, looking for a new place to live. So you can just leave when your lease is up and then move into your new apartment. When you own a home, again, it's a lot harder to just get up and move and sell your house and to time it exactly how you like. And usually, when you do move into a new house, there's a whole bunch of things you got to fix and repair. So there's a lot of cost of just repairs, but also the cost of the down payment, escrow, all the fees just to buy the house. So it is a lot more money up front. Here, I pulled up the average price of a home right now in the U.S. is $420,400. So it may be more or less in your area, but this is kind of the national average is $420,400, and the average rent is $1,616. So I'll just be basing it off these numbers here. Again, it could be higher or lower depending where you live. Right now, the average mortgage rate is about 7.63%. So I'm going to base the numbers off a 30-year fixed mortgage at 7.63%. So that's pretty high. So we're going to say, hey, you just want to buy a house, you're tired of renting right now at these numbers. Um, your mortgage rate will come out to $2,758. So in this example, the average rent is $1,616, but the average mortgage is $2,758. So you're paying over $1,000 a month um, just to own, that particular house versus rent that particular house. So I mean that, yeah, I can see why a lot of people say I'll just rent. And plus, you have to put down, down payment. You have all that, whatever. Again, you might have to fix up a bunch of stuff. So you're going to be out a lot of cash, um, and you're going to be paying $1,000 more a month than someone renting, right across the street or right next door to you. Now, um, if we calculate what you're going to pay, at 7.63% interest over 30 years, how much you pay in principal and interest, and we're also going to add up how much you paid in rent over the 30 years. And we're going to calculate a rent increase of about 3%, which is the national average. Um, so what that does, that gives us rent over 30 years with, 3.5% yearly increase comes out to $1,025,713. So that's how much rent you would have paid in 30 years, um, starting at 1,615 a month and raising the rent 3.5% every year. At the end of 30 years, you would have paid $1,025,713.92. Now your mortgage, it was 2,500, $2,758. You pay that for 30 years, you end up paying $1,384,680. So you're actually going to be paying over $300,000 more. I mean, it's amazing how much 7.63% interest is, because you paid 420,000 for the house, but by the time you pay off the house, you ended up paying $1,384,680. So at the end of 30 years, you would have paid $300,000 more than the person who had been renting for the past 30 years. So at this point, it's like, see, it was a better idea to rent. And then you weren't locked down in that one house for 30 years. You could have moved to different parts of the country, traveled, all kinds of things. So yeah, that is true. But also, let's not forget, at the end of 30 years, the renter, remember the rent has been going up every year. It goes up 3.5%. So at the end of 30 years, guess what the rent is? So someone who wanted to rent that same house in 30 years would be paying $4,623. So up until, in 30 years, your mortgage is still $2,758, but the renter is now paying $4,623 to rent the same house. Also, at the end of 30 years, your mortgage is paid off. So technically, you have zero mortgage, you have zero rent, you still have property taxes and maintenance, but you won't be making a monthly mortgage payment anymore. But the renter, that never stops. There's no 30-year rent contract. You just keep paying. Every year you sign a new contract, you got to keep paying rent until you die. So at the end of 30 years, the renter is now paying $4,623 a month in rent. And here's the kicker. He owns nothing. This renter has zero equity. You're still renting things. So at the end of the month, you're pretty much homeless unless you can come up with the rent for your next month's rent payment. And then you have nothing to show for it. The homeowner, again, has zero mortgage, but the home value, if we base it on annual appreciation rate of 3%, the home will be worth about $1,021,155. So you paid off your mortgage, you have zero payment every month, and now you have a house worth $1,021,155. Yes, in the long run, you paid $300,000 more than the renter, but you don't have a monthly payment, and now you have a house you could sell for $1,021,155, or you could go around and rent it to someone if you were no longer living there or you wanted to maybe move into a smaller place. But you could now rent that for $4,623 a month. And you have no mortgage on it. So yes, you don't really, until you get to the very final steps of it and you look at everything, at the end of 30 years, it does make a lot more sense, even with the crazy prices. You could have always refinanced, that mortgage down lower at a lower interest rate if the rates, came down over those 30 years. But just locking it in at today's, just saying you bought a house right now at today's prices, at today's mortgage rate, and you just paid that for the next 30 years, you're still ahead. You have equity. You have $1 million home, and you have zero mortgage payment versus the renter who's paying $4,623 in rent every month still, or, they'll be homeless, and they have zero equity. Now, imagine if you had two homes, right? If you had two homes, you could live in one home with no mortgage payment. And if you had a second home collecting $4,623 a month, you don't have to work, right? You don't have to do anything. That second home after 30 years would also have no mortgage. So you could rent that out, collect the rent. Your home you live in has no mortgage. So you're living there rent free, and you can just live off the income off the second home. So if you had just rented in the short term, yeah, you would have saved a lot of money. I was looking at a chart, and it wasn't up until year 17 that your mortgage became cheaper than what the rent was. So in other words, it took 17 years of rent increases for it to go over that $2,700 a month mortgage payment. So for the first 17 years, you're going to be paying more than what the house could rent for. But after that, it completely changes. So yeah, it's a long-term thing. You know, if you do want to buy a house, it's a long-term commitment. You can't just buy it and sell it. You know, the markets may be in your favor, but this is just, you know, the markets go up and down. You don't have to time it perfectly. But if you just bought one and just stayed in it for 30 years, you should be very much ahead of anyone who's renting. So if you don't own your own home, probably the first step is just to buy your own home to live in, especially if you're not planning to move anytime soon. Um, it's not necessarily exactly buying it at the cheapest price at the lowest mortgage. It's the time. The sooner you can get to that 30 years, the sooner you'll see the benefits. Regardless if you're paying 4% or 7%, in the end, it doesn't matter. You're still going to be way ahead of the renter. And with better, you know, if you buy a house at a cheaper price with lower interest rates, you know, you may it may only take a few years for everything to, you know, instead of 17 years, it may happen in 5, 10 years where it's cheaper to own the home than to rent one. So anyway, something to think about. And let me know if you decided to buy a house recently, or if you're a long time homeowner, and how you feel about this. Was it really hard in the beginning? Were you paying more to, you know, versus renting? Was your mortgage higher than what the rents were in the area? And how long did it take before you actually saw yourself uh, saving money by owning it? You were saving versus renting, where it was cheaper to have that mortgage than to continually pay the increasing rent. Or do you regret it? You know, I know some people have just bought a home and everything's been going the other way, right? The price of the house is going down, the rents are coming down. So in the short term, it could be really looking bad. But if you hold this long enough till the end of your 30-year mortgage, um, well, history shows you should be doing very well and much better off than someone who rents for the next 30 years. Well, let me know your thoughts on all this, and let me know if you're a renter, owner, and how it was for you in the beginning, or if you paid off your loan and you're enjoying the benefits of having no mortgage and a lot of home equity. Well, that's all I have for you today. Your friend, Angry Tim.